The phrase, gather ye poets while ye may, just came to mind. Welcome. Thanks for being here today. Really nice to see everybody for the second annual celebration of Burlington Poets on the final day of National Poetry Month. Can you hear me all right in the back? Very good. So we hope to close out National Poetry Month with panache. I always wanted to say panache in public. For those, I know many, if not most of you. For those who don't know me, I'm Dave Cavanagh. Last year, Major Jackson, Barbara Shatara, and Florence McLeod organized the first celebration. Many of you were here, and if you were, I think you remember what a great afternoon of poetry it was. This year, Florence and I thought we'd try to keep the party going, and so thanks to all of you, here we are. I don't know if a second time means we can really call this the second annual anything, but we are. Maybe the annual in the title is more of a hope than a history. It's a hope that this event will keep happening every year to represent how important poetry is in our community. It's also great for people just to get together and chat. We've been struck by how delighted everybody has been to see each other, and that's fabulous. I want to thank a few organizations and a few people. First of all, thank you, Fletcher Free Library, for sponsoring and hosting this event. In particular, thanks to Library Director Ruby Simon, who's over there, and Lisa Buckton, who's making sure you can hear me at this moment. Thanks to Phoenix Books for being a sponsor and for being here today. Phoenix folks are in the back table with a lot of the poets, there you go, waving, with a lot of the poets' books on hand. Today is also Indie Bookstore Day, so please support Phoenix and the poets by buying some books. Thank you to RETN, the Educational Television Network, for filming today's events and for its generous support generally. And of course, very big thanks to all the poets who are reading here today. We won't have introductions. I'd ask each poet to say her or his name before starting to read. Each poet will read for up to 4 minutes. 26 poets. What to call this group? There are so many good collective nouns for animals. A gaggle of geese, a pride of lions, a scold of jays, a pounce of cats, a lamentation of swans. Isn't that great? But here's my favorite, a murder of crows. Kind of rough on the crows, but it's a great phrase. But 26 poets, what to call them? Let's call them a wonder. A wonder of poets. So let the wonder begin. Jari? Where's Jari?
Thank you all for being here, and thank you, David and Florence and the library. My name is Jari Chevalier. Andean strains. Wind feathering grass. Horsetails touch. From a horse's snout, a hummingbird's sound. Wind in eucalyptus spooks the horses. They reposition. Lake silt in the horse's iris. No one's seen the bottom of the gorge, or of thought or love. No one's seen the bottom. Wind polishing metals in grain. Sometimes horses stand and sleep. The wind is still. 5 sleep, 3 eat. The tick and the unified field. Buzz, shudder, tick. The grass fronds cross and tap. Feathers must, fur pawed in hiding, insects intent on shifting their legs. Skeins of nests rustled. All the susurrus syncopated noise of uncut grass lured her to the field. Violet and ice-yellow moths taunted and rested on wildflowers. At the edge of the tall grasses, their shadows rhythms on the ground, she sunk, waiting on ideas to strike her. But they wove on, incessant, like sun nerves in water. Something did come to her, not an idea, a thing. Lusty for blood, it dropped into her hair and latched on by her ear. A cocoon on the underside of a blade through the light. A frog's throat trembled. Principles, she thought, primal forces. Heat, sweat, shivers, voices, her body quaked with fever. She paced her lab, the tick virus swelling, delirium voices whispering, it's something in the feelings, the nerves of beings. So she pinned live subjects down to boards and tapped their fear on her instruments. She built the equation, urges of plants pressed to window panes, the pull of life on the sluggish heart that winces on. Water spiraling down the drain, clockwise or counterclockwise, everything, all. She squared the living and divided the dead till it, yes, maybe, fit, almost. Sunlight, crickets. She staggered into the wave and buzz, where the sated tick unhinged and dropped away to bear a nourished sack of eggs. The field, blowing harder, grasses in tussled waves, incessant and measureless, this whole earth, cloud, sun, wind, breathing its breathing, mixing and melding, and no body, no reason could trace to an origin this hunger, ticking, up and running, that we are, then were. Short poem. Unkempt graveyard near the shore. Trespassing on ground of former love, tussocks whisper here of nests and the vanquished. Swans hiss and fish nearby, undoing the slip knots of their throats. Cool, eroded, greening headstones. Wetlands with no relief from tides. I come here often to wonder how to live and listen. Thank you.
Got to do my version of name calling now. David Cavanagh, you are a cool man. Florence McLeod, you are a cool woman. Thank you so much. This is, maybe some of you might remember this guy, Polo O'Toole. He froze to death on the street a couple years ago. This is called In Dreams, Paul Returns to Tell Us What It's Like. I was an insomniac, sleeping like the dead, bare feet, cold sand. I was humming a ragtime tune. The ocean was making some noise out in the fog saying, come over here and I'll kill you. Wind standing my hair on end, and then a head rises just above the tide line. Hello, Jim. The head looks like an ice cream white hat mannequin, but the voice is certainly Paul's. Already I'm thinking, look, I'm an insomniac, and I'm dreaming for once. I don't want anything psychological. I want an epic action movie dream. I want to grow gills and live underwater in a sucking tugboat. I want to ride a caped bottlenose dolphin into cannon fodder, save the kingdom of the seals. But no, I get Paul, the guy who watched cervical cancer disappear his wife in 4 months, the guy who put some very generous trust fund up his nose, the guy who froze to death on the street full of Bud Light and Valium on the coldest night of the year. Hello, Jim, Paul says again, sounding amazingly chipper for a man who died with his face frozen to a heat grate. I answer, Paul, I thought you were dead. Obviously, I never know what to say. Do I look dead, he says? Truth is, he does not look good. The head is more like the idea of a head, but melted a little. Edvard Munch without the scream, something you and your friends wouldn't want to stumble upon in the dark. I choose not to answer the question. Are you playing any music? Somewhere there's laughter. The sea inside the fog says, come over here and I'll send in a wave, knock you on your ass. Yeah, man, says Paul. I play with Roy Boy Orbison and George Harrison, the Quiet Beetle. Every day, sometimes we tour. Roy Boy taught me how to roll my R's and holler mercy. I'm thinking pretty good for a guy who just knew how to collect priceless vintage guitars and change strings. And then suddenly I feel it, the dream slipping away, traffic noise outside my window, Charles Dickens and the ghost of Christmas past, the ocean whispers, not much time left. Right now, come over here and you'll be fish food. So I focus on the white head and feel the question rise out of the tangle of my stomach, rise through my throat, push against the back of my front teeth until I say it, Paul, what's it like? More laughter out of nowhere. Paul speaks, well, actually, it's a lot like Puerto Rico. The winter we stayed there on the beach, every day it was 85, and one night Eileen and I take the boat out. It's against the rules. The landlady telling us there are hungry razor teeth in these waters, things bigger than a house lurking down deep, waiting for you, food chain. But we row out anyway in the starry, starry night, the oars banging. So Eileen takes off her shirt and shorts and purple underwear. We wrap and muffle those oars in her clothes. Drift on a flat sea for hours. Every once in a while, see a flash of phosphorescence, something big down there, moving. Dark, though. Can't see her in the inside of a horse darkness of it all. Silver and gold lights make a necklace speed line on the Puerto Rico coast. I reach out. I can't find her, but I know she's there, her breathing. Think all my life, I wanted to love someone like this. Now I do. Feel the pressure on my heart like it's some big bloody water balloon in free fall, jumping out of a plane, free falling into your great, 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 great grandmother's arms. What's it like? It's a lot like that.
Hi, I'm Sue Burton. And thanks to Dave and Florence and all of you for making this happen. I'm going to read 3 poems, and the first 2 are from your program, and they're from the Woman Sawn in Half series. The House of Illusion. She'd say, someday you'll go on without me. She worked the back of the box, from underneath, where the saw couldn't reach. Her name was Ruby. We had nothing in common but our long, skinny feet. She was down there in the dark like Nijinsky's fawn, in a cream-colored bodysuit, little goat horns that nobody could see, bobby pinned in hair that nobody could see, red-streaked and kinked. And of course, the silver shoes, same size as mine at the end of the box, that everybody could see. She was always talking down there. I'm in Nijinsky's dead brain. She'd get louder when Jack started with a saw, inside the cloven soul. The whole box thumping like a seance, Jack sawing away. Shut her the hell up. But how? That voice splitting me like a headache. It got so I didn't know who I was. She was, I don't know, a sprite, dressed like a man dressed as a goat. She'd say, it's magic. And I'd think, I'm not real either, up here now with my own skinny feet out the end of a box and a lipstick smile like the all-American prom queen. After the show, she'd perch on the bar in her fawn leotard and hold up her drink. Always something tall and purple or blue with maracchinos and crushed ice. And she'd say, "It's art." All in all, another productive day in the thicket of disappointment. My brain in a bramble, heart in a porcupine vest, and at the end of the box, a pair of red fox racers, hyperextended toes, dangling choke cherries. Birds and bitter berries up there in the brain as well. Of course, the heart is a little brain, oxytocin and social cues, not just a simple pump. So, for instance, if the heart races, you will feel anxious. And if you feel anxious, the heart will race. Anecdotally, tickle the heart 3 times a week. Tickle me. What a lovely old-fashioned word. In my field, we say, the show must go on, i.e., art has a mission. Well then, a broken heart is a problem. So I'm going to switch gears. I'm going to read a tiny section of a long poem, a 30-page poem, about my hometown, Massillon, Ohio, which was once a thriving steel town. And the long poem deals with 2 of the darkest times in the history of the town. First, 1937, when Republic Steel brutally put down a workers' strike. The second low point was in the 1980s, when the last of the steel mills pulled out of town. Tomorrow is May Day. This poem is in honor of workers and the ongoing struggle. Clean fill. Betty doesn't like to hear me say it. Town beyond saving. She has a clipping now, Gardening News Roundup. Compost your car. It's true. Bring me your tired refrigerators, your toasters, your sorry plastic bags. Shred them, bacterialize them. Presto compo, clean fill. EPA approved. Junked cars actually used to landscape Disney World. Why not compost the mill, Betty says. So how deep do you dig so runoff doesn't croak the already scuzzy Tuscarawas? Do the vacant stores get shredded too, and the decrepit high school whose bond levy goes down every year anyway? And what about the poor union schmooze marching up Main Street, even 5-year-olds with signs, "Give my dad's job back"? Do we throw them in too? Blood is good for the soil. How much bacteria does it take to eat a dead steel mill?
Hi, I'm Daniel Lusk. I'm going to read a couple of Midwestern poems, recollections, true stories. This is called When Horses Love, from my father. When horses love, it seems an immense thing passes. Obsession, war, conversion, coming of age, revolution or a prairie storm. Wind lashing crowns of oaks and maples, scarlet flags, virgin oats and rye threshed green in the fields, by hail like shards of glass, wild pounding of the haymow doors. And we might be afraid, but there is too much of wonder. It is heart-racing weather, roof beat and mutter of falling water, runoff in the gutters, rain larruping the flailing branches, blowing in the open window, lifting the curtains, sweat wet on the page where I write. Thunderstorms were metaphors for wildness I knew our father felt, heartache and turmoil inside. He watched them come, great towering spinnakers of rampant thunderclouds, roiling, churning, billowing, a gathering madness above us over the pasture field. The two of us stood small, apart, awestruck, faces lifted to the expanding skies. Horses at a gallop, challenging the fences, manes and tails flying, teeth bared to neck and haunch and withers, rearing to paw the wind, screaming. Sometimes at night, he stood on the wide porch or at the open windows, unmoving. Lightning cleaved the dark, thunder rocked the house, while our mother roused us from our beds upstairs, hearts hammering, scrawny-legged in our underwear, into the dank safety of the coal bin in the washing cellar. He stared, transfixed, and smoke curled outward from his cigarette as from a lighted fuse. Sometimes a sound surrounded us, filling our chests to hurt and closed our throats, as if the thunder spoke, as if some voice within him or some other deeply resonating instrument returned the rumbling as human song. I learned never to ask what made him weep and sing, or why life seemed so ordinary otherwise. This is a Western South Dakota poem. It's a true story wrapped in folklore. It's called The Oat Bitch and the Old Man's Daughters. It's an old story, and I suffered it. How the patriarch fell and the tractor fell silent. How wind stirred among the crowd of oat sheaves left standing in the field, as if his spirit waited among them. How a stranger came in the guise of a preacher to lift unwittingly the last sheaf to the wagon, who bent his head to the load in prayer or resignation. How the sheaf goat, dressed as a child, lifted a pitchfork to stick it into the wagon load as the tractor leapt ahead. How the stranger, as in a ritual of harvest, came to be killed. I was that stranger. I bled to the Tynes' victorious singing, bled for the oat bitch's hunger. They laid me down by the howling thresher, torn half naked and shorn of disguise, cleansed and poulticed my body with unguents, so I no longer knew myself or how long I died, but awoke one day to silence and the curious balm conferred on my wounds by the old man's daughters. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Adrie Kusserow, and it's nice to see people I haven't seen in a long time. I was under the impression I could only read my one poem printed, so I'm going to do that, but then I might grab one from this and read one more if I have time. The first one in Vermont, and the next one probably about South Sudan. The Adoration for Will, my son, when he was about 2. It's morning, I pull you from the crib, all warm and yeasty, your hair stuck up like 2 soft horns, you beaming brighter than a headlight in anticipation of the nip. Silly boy, tender pink niblet, succulent little beast, waternut, love blossom, Panis bulbosa, lactata nipiana. And so begins the verbal fevers of my love-smitten Tourette's, speaking in tongues wild with metaphor, swinging from branch to branch of simile, rooting about for words to match your roundness, your just succulency, your sheer plump thighliness. All morning I groom you with tiny love names. I am a cat, you are my kitten, cowlicked with locution. I am a sound nymph, tickling you with alliteration, a Swedish masseuse rubbing you with vowels. Who would have known my love would rise up so fiercely, hover delirious in small bits of sound. All day the adjectives landing and re-landing, determined to match your infinite perfection, my sweet boy, my sweet boy. This is a poem for a woman in South Sudan who I met who had been a slave, and I was attempting to interview her as an anthropologist and sort of the story of that encounter. War metaphysics for a Sudanese girl, for a Cheek Arok Deng. I leave the camp unable to breathe, me, Freud girl, after her interior, she, lost girl, after my purse. Her face dark as eggplant, her gaze unpinnable, untraceable, floating, open, defying the gravity I was told keeps pain in place. Maybe trauma doesn't harden, packed tight as sediment at the bottom of her psyche, dry and cracked as the desert she crossed. Maybe memory doesn't stalk her with its bulging eyes. Once inside the body, does war move up or down? Maybe the body pisses it out. Maybe it dissipates like sweat and fog under the heat of yet another colonial god. In America, we say, tell us your story, lost girl. You'll feel lighter. It's the memories you must expel, the bumpy ones, the tortures, the rapes, the burnt huts. So a cheek brings forth all the war she can muster, and the doctors lay it on a table like a stillbirth and pick through the sharpest details, bombs, glass, machetes, and because she wants to please them, she coughs up more and more, dutifully emptying the sticky war like any grateful lost girl in America should when faced with a flock of white coats. This is how it goes at the trauma center. All day, the hot poultice of talk therapy, coaxing out the infection. At night, her host family trying not to gawk, their veins pumping neon fascination. Deep in the suburbs, her life flavoring dull white lives, spicing up supper, really, each lost girl a bouillon cube of horror.
I'm David Huddle. In the booklet, I have a poem that's called What Are You Up To? And it's one of a sequence of poems that I've written that seek to answer questions like that, short, simple questions. How do you feel about your body? Duck-footed, it's got toenail fungus, asthma, a gut, bad eyesight, lousy hearing, achy joints. But if I were trying to sell it, I'd say, damn good body that needs daily maintenance, a nap, toast, a banana for breakfast, a light lunch, salad, and meat for dinner, a couple of beers, some fruit. It spent just one night in a hospital in all these years. It's got dermatology issues. Cancer's got the hots for it. Body sings in the car, though its chops are shot. It's no dancer, but will dance with or without a partner. Fears suffering, thinks it's got enough courage to face death, but hates the hell out of old age. This is called, Are You Sure? When I am, I think I probably ought not to be. When I say I am, and then it turns out I'm wrong, the embarrassment can be instructive, depending on how open to character building I am. My wife keeps informal statistics on which one of us is right in our little disagreements. She's far ahead, and her numbers serve as a humbling force in my household conduct and attitude. I am insufferably uncertain and free to be as corrupt as I want in what I say. Think of me as unrepentantly loose cannon, mayor of the town of Usually Wrong. This is called Oh Say Can You See? The national anthem starts making you an American crazy before you're born. 30,642 times I figure I've heard it. I was in my high school band. I watch a lot of sports. I know all the words when somebody sings it on TV. I hum the tenor part. When I'm in hell, it'll be the last thing that gets burned away from me. I've renounced my hometown. I've disavowed the South. And lately I've come to see how my country 'tis a nightmare. No more Pledge of Allegiance for me. I can't help it. I'm American. Can't get this goddamn song out of my brain. What can I say? Perhaps you've already said too much, so you have an opportunity here to pause and let silence have its say. To eschew mindless syllables is to bless the conversation with an opening for those fresh and intelligent words for which we've long yearned. The ratio of inane to scintillating shows that idiots dominate our discourse, so that keeping quiet can actually improve the IQ of social intercourse. Try to listen more than you talk. Think of the good you'll do. I reserve the right to be silent. If anybody asks, you can say that. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Julie Cadwallader Staub, a wonder of poets. That's a beautiful phrase. I'm going to remember that. So I'm going to read two poems. The first one is called Measurement. I slept from 10 p.m. last night until 8:27 this morning. 10 hours and 27 minutes. Yesterday, I drove 328 miles to visit my sister in Princeton, New Jersey, the home of Albert Einstein, who captured energy, mass, and the speed of light in an elegant equation every student learns. Look at us. We quantify everything we can in this complex and astonishing world, from nanoseconds to eons, from millimeters to miles, from basis points to billions. But no one can measure the velocity of hope, the way hope hatches fully fledged, in fact, already flying between one word and the next, between one breath and the next. Neither can we calculate the stain of fear, the way it infects a childhood, spreads to a lifetime. And we can only try to imagine the circumference of compassion, the way it shows us the shape of love, embracing, expanding, factoring in forgiveness. It invents its own quantum leap, its own speed of light. My second poem is called Reverence. The air vibrated with the sound of cicadas on those hot Missouri nights after sundown, when the grown-ups gathered on the wide back lawn, sank into their slung-back canvas chairs, tall glasses of iced tea beating in the heat. And we sisters chased fireflies, reaching for them in the dark, admiring their compact black bodies, their orange stripes and seeking antennas as they crawled to our fingertips and clicked open into the night air. In all the days and years that have followed, I don't know that I've ever experienced that same utter certainty of the goodness of life that was as palpable as the sound of the cicadas on those nights. My sisters running around with me in the dark, the murmur of the grown-ups' voices, the way reverence mixes with amazement to see such a small body emit so much light. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Rajnii Eddins. I'll be sharing two pieces. The first one is called The Flower and the Very Wrong Thing. This is for the child in us all. There once was a flower that learned a wrong thing. He'd been taught as a seed just his flowers could sing, that no other rose, petunia, poinsettia could compare to his petals. He thought he was best ever. He sat in the garden basking in sweet sun rays, thinking none could be sweeter, only he deserved praise. But what this young flower had yet to find out, though his colors were lovely, there were numerous amounts of beautiful, vivid rainbows and rose. It would make your eyes quiver, make your nostrils explode, to see all the world's flowers in their magical glory. For not only he had a wonderful story, there was sweet amaryllis, calla lilies, carnations that would make one exclaim, what in blazing tarnations? Baby's breath garlands, sweet peas and tulips, sweet cherry blossoms, daffodils and petunias, hibiscus and holly, laurel and lady slipper. These flowers were stars, they could feel the Big Dipper. With all of their colors and petals galore, one could wander their garden and never be bored. But back to our flower in his garden of one, thinking only he shines, only he can feel sun. This young confused flower is in for a surprise, thinking only his flower song takes to the skies. One day a strong wind carried music to stem, and he heard a great song that was not just for him. Sang of orchids, mimosas, and flowering maples. Chinese lanterns, lady bells rang out playful. The wolf's bane howled, and the flower did shiver. Seemed this was a song he would always remember. Marigolds, daffodils, crocus, and lotus, dahlias and iris, lavender and magnolias, all seemed to be singing, and no one took the lead. Well, it made that young flower feel as small as a seed. Just to think all this time he had been so convinced that only he mattered, it just didn't make sense. Well, after that song graced that young flower's ears, you can bet that he's proud to sing out with his peers. He sings with chrysanthemums, daisies, snapdragons, high-pitched peonies, and the yodeling jasmines. Aster and heather, Queen Anne's lace hibiscus, African moon, angel wings, and gardenias. Even morning glory could be heard in the chorus, for now our young flower sings his song with the forest. So remember, my friends, though you be not a flower, your beauty is yours, and this beauty is ours. Each one of us here holds a beauty so dear that none could erase, no mean word could smear. So don't get so swept in the colors you bring, or get caught up thinking that just your songs sing. So look around you, student, teacher, and neighbor. Everyone to this garden adds a voice with much flavor. My next piece I'd like to do is one I did last year as well. It's called Ode to Fletcher Free. Dear House of Stories, you house our stories. You hold so many tales of the head and the heart on and off your shelves. My story has joined with yours. Now it sings a song. You remember when I was holding my child in these arms, singing her all of my hopes, catching each tear in a sphere with each note, how you held us in your warm and solemn silence. You still let our voices echo on entrance. Now, whenever we traverse that sacred boundary, our voices become tinged with reverence. And you still have room for children's laughter. I love your nooks and crannies, where the beleaguered and winter weather worn go to nest, finding brief respite from living storms and their own torn pages. Carnegie spoke of you, an oasis in the desert, he called you. Still, I wonder if he ever knew how sunlight would stream majesty through the eye of your colored glass, how librarians would trace their own stories, and oh, how the poetry would ring, bounding off of autobiography and fantasy, reverberating through encyclopedias, cookbooks, and fables. You, safekeeper of imagination, childhood's angel. Last week, I blew bubbles into magic memories, watching puppets dance, no strings attached. I found my youngest daughter again and again in bookshelves, as well as just adjacent to the staircase. This is why I know our story is unfolding.
Hello, I'm Marylen Grigas. And my first poem is entitled Hatch. It's about, you may have seen dragonfly nymphs, maybe, come out of their husks in the summer. They climb up, their eggs are, dragonflies drop their eggs in the water, and then the nymphs, when they're ready, a year or so later, climb up a stalk and wait and dry out and become dragonflies. And if there's no stalk around, it could be a dock or an anchor line. So that's the first metaphor in this poem. Hatch. Dragonfly nymphs crouched on 6 spindly legs, small tannish tanks deployed single file on our anchor line, a transit for these crawling creatures up from the shallows. While we swam, then sunned like dazed and blinking lizards, enchanted, hands quiet on kneecaps, our naturalist eyes trained on them. Those nymphs, Escher-like, in ascending order of metamorphosis, drying hard, extravagant, their final molt, lake bottom, scurry and jet finished. Now days of sitting with you, your breathing so like labor, my clasp tightening on your loosening, and late one night, I try to remember those few hours of effort to birth themselves to some greater glory in that sun-muddled limbo between water and sky, when I wanted to say, dear ones, you hatch like spirits. Dear ones, a miracle. Even then we understood it wasn't, nor was hatch the right term. But I need solace, some earthly allegory of multifolded nature. Those few lines of electric blue shock, slow motion vaulting through shoulder blades of old skin, clinging a moment to their own emptied selves, while their huge prismatic eyes focus on mosaics of flickering motion. And they rise, each an exclamation point, stunned blue. Story. A summer night with no need for particulars, but for the bare-limbed sway of things. Dishes clattering in sinks, a radio being tuned. A neighborhood of modest streets and bungalows, paper lanterns strung through apple trees, filtered candlelight around a garden table in a deep backyard. Remnants of a summer banquet. Lightly clad figures lean in to hear a story rise to its conclusion. A crescendo of laughter, a cacophonous bouquet of tone and register spills through the neighborhood, where a passing walker with her dog catches that essential pleasure, a story in its setting, its rise and fall, feels its thrill, even without the words.
I'm not Major Jackson. I've been thinking about why we write poems, why we read poems. And both of these poems are more or less about that. The first one I was inspired to write after a wonderful reading that took place here. I think it was about a month ago. Maybe some of you were here, by M.T. Anderson. He wrote a book called Symphony for the City of the Dead that is about Shostakovich and the siege of Leningrad. So this poem is really about the musical performance that happened after the reading. Shostakovich, Quartet Number 8, dedicated to the victims of war and fascism. We should never have sat in the front row. We were like voyeurs at an accident scene, unable to turn away from the terrible cries of the wounded. One moment the bows flayed the strings, the next slowly extracted glass shards from the disembodied memories of the missing. The musicians' faces flinched as they gave voice to what they saw before their eyes, so strangely encoded. The eighth could have been a suicide note or its cathartic substitute, vehicle for blunt survival. Perhaps there was some solace in knowing it will be impossible now for us to forget what we've heard. Is this why we make things? The old sounds cannot hold this life. We grope in the dark for other vessels. Our pens are empty. Imagine a time when our tools were made of stone, when we worked under the naked sky in the presence of fire. What did we remember? Did we remember? How did we grieve before there were names for the ones missing around the fire? How did we live through a season when the earth was scorched and bare and yielded no fruit? Before there was a word to call up the sound and the smell of rain. Was there music? How did we hope? This next poem is about a family tradition of reading Dylan Thomas's Child's Christmas in Wales. Maybe some of you share this tradition. It is evening. 3 generations sit down in a living room, littered with the flotsam of Christmas Day. This year, there's a new baby and a newly divorced neighbor, her first Christmas alone. I extract a half-eaten candy cane wedged between 2 couch pillows before I take my place next to the 6-year-old. Last year, she couldn't have navigated hop on pop. Now, she sails through the first page of the poem, including the lines, I could never remember whether it snowed for 6 days and 6 nights when I was 12, or whether it snowed for 12 days and 12 nights when I was 6. She is as untroubled by the skimpy punctuation and quirky syntax as the next reader, her dentist grandfather, is troubled by it. The Welshman's words are passed from hand to hand around the room, now intoned with a thick South Boston accent, now in a voice muddled by wine and riches, and by minds just struggling to take hold of the strange meanderings of another man's mind. I love this poem, and it doesn't matter at all what happens, because it's true. The words need us to form them again in our clumsy mouths, swaddling them with our thick tongues, bringing them forth, words that are but remnants of another man's memories, wondrously reimagined. Murmured together, they become our own memories. It doesn't matter that the words dissolve the instant they're spoken, like snowflakes falling on the Welsh sea. The little dog-eared red book travels around the circle. We read our treasured pages, as some of us have done nearly every Christmas for 40 years, in other rooms now inhabited by strangers. The last reader closes the book. The room is silent for a few moments, except for the overtones of other voices sounding beyond our walls. The neighbor wipes away a tear, gets up to start on the dishes. Someone pops a bottle. The baby grows restless. Her mother wraps her in a blanket and walks her slowly around the room. Thank you.
Hello, hi, I'm Antonello Borra. It's nice to be part of this community. I'm kind of an animal who writes about other kinds of animals. I'm American, but I write in Italian, so you're going to get the Italian first, and then the English rendition, which I made, so it's not a translation. I cannot control in English the echoes. So in the language of Shakespeare and Emily Dickinson, you will not miss the echo of the Led Zeppelin in my first creature. Anyways, here it goes. La gazza. Per quanto mi riguarda, tutto quello che luccica è d'oro. E io lo rubo. Mi fido di apparenze e ne faccio sostanza. The magpie. As far as I am concerned, all that glitters is gold. And I steal it. I trust appearances and make substance of them. Libis. Ibis redibis non fa differenza. Tanto, prima o poi, tutti ce ne andremo. Quelli che mangiano serpi e carogne e quelli che si nutrono d'amore per il mondo o per qualche dio che appare di profilo. Lasciarsi dietro delle tracce serve a qualcosa? Rimanere indecisi sul senso di una virgola nell'enciclopedia del proprio tempo ci compra anche un minuto a questa mensa? Tra il riso e i bisi di un destino avverso. The English has risi and bisi, which is a typical Venetian plate. It means rice and peas. The ibis. Ibis, king ibis. It makes no difference. Sooner or later, we'll all go. Those feeding on snake and carrion, and those feeding on love for the world, or for some deity appearing in profile. What's the point of living traces? Does indecision on the meaning of a comma in our Times Encyclopedia buy us even a minute at this banquet between through the risi e bisi of an unfriendly fate? Il merlo. Sono un merlo, non sono un corvo adolescente. Il colore non conta. Il corvo è un'altra razza, una razza cattiva. Basta sentirne il verso per capirlo. Se un merlo apre il becco, hai un canto. The blackbird. I'm a blackbird. I'm not an adolescent crow. Color does not matter. A crow belongs to a different race, an evil race. Just listen to its call. You'll understand. When a blackbird opens its beak, you get a song. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Barbara Murphy. I'm going to read 3 poems for you, starting with the one that's in the program for today. First draft. Be patient, I tell 5-year-old Tate, just released from the 100th day of kindergarten. We wait for a parking space to open up as 3 70-something-year-old women approach their car, walking as though to do so almost hurts. We slow down as we get older, I tell him, though not all of us in ways we should think too quick tongue, too rapid a judgment. They are loaded in, the women, 2 in front, 1 in back. They even turn the key slow, he says. And just then they ease out, the space ours. On the unseasonably warm asphalt of the basketball court, still too early for the hustle and drama of the big guys game, he pulls from his backpack 3 easy reader books, illustrated by an amateur photographer of a town that could be, but isn't ours. I go to school, he reads. I go to the store. I go to the playground. He reads park for playground, and I can hardly correct him. They are that close. They almost mean the same. I try to teach syllables, 2 thumps for playground, just 1 for park. My fingers against the warmed page of the soft book in the folded thigh of this earnest reader, just making his way, just cracking this code. What's that? And this is a sort of gardening season poem, Behind the House. My father mastered our world, a silent row of tomatoes on one long side. Not a garden so much as a statement. Nothing artful or lovely, but the rich, heavy fruit that must have come, we must have eaten, though I have no memory of seeing them ripen. No sense of the bitter tang of tomato separating from green stem. No image of knife sliding into flesh, juice running easily. The smart child knows to turn away from danger long before she learns of loss. The final one is a found poem. The writers in the group know that's that lucky minute when you read something and it strikes you this is almost a poem. I'm going to appropriate it. And it's from a section that the Sunday Times Magazine has, and they're all how-tos. How-to something really interesting like, I don't know, return a difficult ping pong serve or pull someone from a burning building kind of things. And this one is How to Hold a Heart. And it was written as an interview with a heart surgeon. A heart covered in blood is slippery. Don't reach as if for an apple. The heart could slip between your fingers, bruise or tear. Don't worry about the size of your hands. Slide them beneath the heart. You will graze the sac that holds it. Always center the heart in 2 hands. Make a cup of them as if to drink shallow water. Would-be heart holders should care for their hands like concert pianists. Clean, short nails, no jewelry. Be gentle. You could puncture an ailing heart. Pumping a healthy heart is a racehorse. A newborn's heart, $50 size, is the only heart you can safely hold in one hand. Thank you.
Thank you all. So nice to see everyone. How's that? Is that okay? Sharon Webster is my name. Hello. I pull away the big green Dodge under me like a grand piano, a dark wedge of cake, a dent in nature.
a menacing platter. The size was important and seedy. I was a fugitive in those days and liked to think of myself that way. Oops. This is a French word, lo. It was the way I could hear her, even when I couldn't hear her. It was her voice in the water, so cold that it stung. It was the snowball bush in the front yard, drunk on its own runny sweetness. It was her arm over her head like she was reaching for something. It was moving like that. It was the center of the earth in each of her foot soles. It was finally warm enough. It was her breath growing moth-like and furred in the mirror. It was the weight of her hair. It was her hair, period. It was the way that I knew her, full of promise, yet futile. It was something about salt. It was moving. It's a poem for a friend of mine, no longer here. Weeping in the Kmart premenstrual parking lot. Seat-belted next to me, my companion has early Alzheimer's and Down syndrome. The radio sings, not arbitrating, but in a similar tonal zone, simmering in the deep parts, turning, a roiling boat, a slave ship. Who will save your soul? Sings the woman from the dashboard, and a million days are recreated. The ache of complexity, a wet berry of pain, hanged human voice. Is this a joke job or a real job? Is this a joke life or a real life? Jackie has forgotten why we've come. So much forgetting. Time and place are darkened now, a wall of no context, the backside of a mirror. You need great inventiveness when you forget everything. You need great inventiveness and you accept the most marvelous of things as each moment presents its blankness. Jackie does this, but it's tiring for her too. So she remembers me and lets me pull her along. She remembers me and hovers on my arm like one of those air-filled balls at the end of a fishing line. I tug her to the surface, and as the Alzheimer hook and sinker pulls her down, each moment is deeper gravity, farther down, but I work hard to pull her, but I work hard to imagine air. I imagine air and pull her up. I pull her up, and she bobs there perilously, part of both worlds. Now the woman on the radio is singing about hitting the street, the bills to pay, forever struggle, and the universal butt worked off. Who will save your soul? I turn off the ignition, the voice dissolves, and we go in.
If I knew where poems come from, I would go there. Hence, I come here. Bud Lawrence, Poetry Day. You freshen it up, you mess it up, you sweeten it, You bungle, drop your bugle, your flute, lute and cither, cymbals clatter down. Epistemological ground looks far off, with irony, scoff, with tears and compassion, talk and laugh in a fashion. Forked, I'm going to be reading this book, Shadow Torch, which is free among the books yonder. But first, forked water. He fights with the virgin and is beaten. One lonely, lordly gesture goes unnoticed. She even laughs. He languishes, seated with sunken arms. A curse, a stifled bird cry. Farm field moist from plow, eyes as though hoisted from ripples, now stripped for essential flight. Testing torn wings, a cloudy shape burns between the syllables, curves draped with bronze. Let on my pennant, my kestrel, burnish his beak, reveries of the nearly sleeping wrestler. Shadow torch for Huis Donath. After Afra of Georg Trockel's, all stories are utterly false. I think before or afterwards, only the Orpheus myth. 1847, Albert Pinkham Ryder never cleaned studio. Is absolute. True, Georges Rouault had paint on his hands. After St. Augustine, nisi crederitis non intelligitis. Sis, don't match the pants to the jacket. Spitting rain, like the seven-headed red dog. Unless you will have believed, you will not understand. With tongues out. Gather red osier. What is concealed in the pyre? From drawing board, with green stems, one gull's ascent, departing flight. Before lessons, youngsters. Often from moon saffron cradle, I put my hand on a viper. How calculate pine's boughs where moon lilts, eerie alight to far trees. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Angela Patton. I've been thinking about those collective nouns for poets. A gaggle of poets might be a good one, but Daniel has a better one, a plethora of poets. Perhaps other people can come up with some too. This poem is called Blood Moon, and you probably remember the lunar eclipse we had a few months ago. This came out of it. Blood Moon. Neighbors appear in ones and twos to cluster outside the buildings. Some have brought folding chairs, others binoculars, as though expecting fireworks and not a lunar eclipse. Those with the best equipment relay the news to the rest of us, but everyone can see a shadow begin to move across that unearthly countenance, A woman covering her hair with a black lace mantilla as she hastens shamefaced through the side door of a church. Now the moon is a blood orange in a bowl of stars. Some burst into applause and others follow. Our moon, they murmur proudly, proprietary as children watching mother get tarted up for a night on the town, awed by her transformation from domestic drab to celestial queen, the old familiar become untouchable. This is the poem that appeared in the booklet, and it's, I suppose it's my impression or my recollection of the onset of the 1960s in Ireland, where I grew up. It's called Spring Comes to a Dying Decade. Here's the housefinch with his flaming breast, the goldfinch yellowing up like a canary, the cardinal fully incarnadined. It must be spring. And it's as if we were back in the early 60s, staring at the static on our tiny black and white TV screens, eating porridge and potatoes in a muted universe. When suddenly it was all brilliant plumage, cuffs like ruffed grouse. Mother wore a woodpecker's red beret. Brother was an icterine warbler in a paisley cravat. Dark-suited men dared to wear pink shirts like shy flycatchers. Even the priest risked a raven black leather jacket and a mood ring. The world turned bottoms up like a tufted titmouse freeloading at the feeder, his raucous squawks asserting what we instantly twigged was mating season. Last winter, I broke my wrist, and it's the first time I had ever broken a bone. And what was worse than the surgery was the fact that they called it a fragility fracture, the kiss of death. Anyway, this poem is called Tracks. After surgery, the stitch marks look like bird feet walking up my arm. But what strange bird has left its bone-white prints embedded in my wrist like needle tracks? Perhaps it was the raven, that faux sorrowful funeral director, walking beak forward, gloved hands folded behind his back, who walks the twin trajectories of a railway line that leads to a long-defunct station where I might meet myself returning from the beach with two scabbed knees, embossed inoculations against disease, the wheels of ancient injuries like medals from the battlefields of childhood, and my mother's crow's feet inching towards my eyes. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Florence McLeod. And the first poem I'd like to read for you is called Questions for Monet. In school, it was with teachers' caricatures you drew in your copybooks to relieve the boredom. Out of school in afternoons, along jetties, beaches, cliffs, you walked and decided burial next to a buoy was what you wanted. For 20 francs, you'd sit in the marketplace, draw a passerby's portrait, but as a cartoon. Later, as a soldier in Algiers, you fell in love with a dazzling African light and color. And then later still, you painted your mistress, Camille, in just 4 days for the show at the Salon. Haystacks, poplar trees, the Thames, painted from your room at the Savoy, and then Venet's 22 panels of nymphs. Hurried your painting, using broader strokes as your eyes were fading, you still trying to capture the fleeting light. How did your troubled eyes lance the colors contained within the shapes of the world, even when the white fog hung over the Thames? What colors did you see in the river the night that you tried to drown yourself in the River Seine? Most of all, please tell me what kept you afloat. Were your fingers freezing as you painted in winter out in the fields, the untold shades of color hidden in a snow-capped haystack, painted over and over? And tell me, what drove you to paint the water lilies in your pond on enormous panels every day those last 10 years as your light faded out? Why, near the end, did you ask Blanche to help you destroy 60 canvases stored in your studio, then make your family promise no flowers on your grave, leave them in the garden? Do you know they placed a single sheaf of wheat on your coffin? And what do your eyes see now in the deep darkness? Mysterious, fine shades of black no one else could ever see? Or maybe you see darkness rolling backwards into deep blues, the sapphire, then indigo, then cobalt color of the sea, where you are down on the docks, buried next to a buoy. The next poem I'm going to read is in the program, and it's called Saturday Night. Saturday night, a good Scotch, Sidney Bechet, Sean Colvin, Nina Simone, Van Morrison, Francoise Hardy, Bruce Cockburn, Aretha Franklin, Louis Armstrong, switching to red wine, too easy to slide down the Scotch when listening to music that takes you away, oh, to be taken away. Isn't that what Saturday nights are made for? If you're alone, if you're not alone, away from the syllables of dimanche, lundi, mardi, mercredi, jeudi, vendredi, finally on samedi. As years stack up, harder to find ways to lose yourself, but becomes more essential. After all, the subject of yourself has its limits. The world is what matters. Joan Osborne, Stan Getz, some female vocalist who died too young, Eva, I think her name was. The last poem I'm going to read is called Alpine Glow. When the sun casts the mountains with a strange copper glow on a summer night, they call it Alpine Glow. It's astonished me tonight, finishing off the day of bright morning sun, where it fell over the soft body of the land, drawing the dew out, then rising high in the blue summer sky. All day, dazed by it, the sudden unforeseen grace of summer. My grown son traveling next to me in the car, reading the map, consoling me for the wrong turn, promising me it's fine. The hours spent in the nursing home with his grandmother, who, holding our hands, told us over and over how much she loved us. His arms around me in the elevator when we leave her. Now, driving home together, the sun has cast this alpine glow over the burnished mountains, illuminating the comfort of the land, joy of unimagined copper light, the way living fills you up. Thank you.
Dave Cavanagh. I'll read 3 poems. The first one is in the program. Delta Flight on Time. Not Alpha or Omega Airlines. No straight talk of the beginning or the end. We're Delta types, belted for takeoff and deep sky to knife through. Mega bowl of blue on the way from one where to another where. Tick-tock is how we think inside our silver bullet. A few ticks later, The wedding we've flown for slides into funeral because a dear mother of someone dear has stroked away to a blue realm uncharted. Everyone agrees, keep the honeymooners in the dark. Let them jet away to their own horizon in a dream of unmade babies. Homeward, the sky at 30,000 feet is still blue. A bland, unblinking eye reminds us we are the Delta crowd, the huddled in-betweeners, hurtling through refracted light, bits of it glinting off us as we doze or chat, gaze into cloud banks beneath us, briefly attend to briefly allowed electronic devices, even as we watch our watches and, without believing, believe. I've been writing recently about sleepwalking, which I used to do as a kid. Some would say I'm still sleepwalking. Maybe I'm sleepwalking now. The somnambulist skates Lake George. As never again seen by me, George, titanium taut and silver blue black as a lake pike's eye. Right down the middle, far from pine-treed shores I weave, dip among unseen markers, glide like a god on ice that cracks its own silence, grinding its foot-thick plates, bubbling like baby belugas, then a soul-shivering boom from deep down. My bladed feet and straining legs know more than I where to head and why, so I swerve as I did one night as a child, unawake, untouched across our cellar floor, pocked with drills, saws, hammers, extension cords left out from the day's reno work. Parents wide-eyed on the stairs, afraid to wake me. I never misstepped once, as now I skate a perfect unmapped path and leave behind a glitter of etchings for no one to follow. Shuttered cottages line the shores like family secrets. I skate on past, thoughts like breath taking shape in 0 Fahrenheit air, trusting for now the ancient, certain scissoring of thighs to handle what's beneath, ahead, behind. And the last short poem called Quantum Jump. The wave that crashes on the rocks is made of particles that behave so much like waves. The scientists scratch their individual heads until they're one bobbing mass and their voices rise like spray. Certain, uncertain, certainly we are all going to die one day, probably, is about all with precision we can say. No one has ever not done it, and I don't aim to be the first. Not that I lack ambition, only that aiming doesn't seem to help. Still, smack the tennis ball against the wall often enough, it could one time go straight through. So I say unto you, phone the woman, plant the rare hibiscus. Most likely it won't take, except when it does. Thank you.
I'm Kristen. I will be doing translation today. The first set will bridge Burlington to Cuba. Last year I said I think it's actually representative of Burlington. There's a lot of interest in international literatures and cultures, so here's some of that. And then I'll come up again in a few minutes to work with a writer from Burlington, Tina Escaja. But first of all, as a group of writers, I think we should just call ourselves a group of displaced people. I am an ex-Midwesterner also, And in fact, I am from Worcester, which is about 40 minutes away from Massillon, the epicenter of Sue's epic poem. And our economic disaster was a little bit later when Rubbermaid offshored all of its production. So if you need to paint your house, please buy Worcester brush. I'm going to start with Juan Carlos Flores. This book is just out. I read a piece or two from it last year. I'll read different ones now. I'm avoiding anything that requires a lot of context. So let me just say, for those of you who want something that sounds really Cuban, this is written and dedicated to the largest housing project in Cuba and may still be the largest public housing project in the world today. It was at the time he was writing this. There is a lot of cultural content. I have a whole introduction that talks about it, but I'm not going to give it to you now. The other thing is the Spanish is all in here. It's a bilingual edition, so you can see that. But I thought I would start with one where I think it's relatively easy to tap into something pretty much everybody has heard about Cuba, which is that in the 21st century, Cuba is undergoing great change. So here is a persona from Juan Carlos, someone reacting to great change. He's also a performance poet. He's received awards both for the poetry on paper, but then also for his use of performance. Man leopard. He ages, leaving no offspring, and does not adapt to the exchange of those parts for these parts, or to the new transit rules. One thing, mixing with the opposite thing, produces bastardization. And the naming system has become filled with bastardizations, which should belong to other naming systems in accordance with their features. I age, leaving no offspring, and do not adapt to the exchange of those parts for these parts, or to the new transit rules. Juan Carlos has developed this very characteristic minimalism, so these will all be very short. Instruction manual. Go, horse, go! With a horse, you apply aerodynamic method and horsey horsificates. Go, horse, go! With a horse, you apply aerodynamic method and horsey horsificates. Go, horse, go! But if you take away the horse's food and rest, the necessaries, the horse croaks before. Juan Carlos is an outsider poet and an autodidact, but he's also very well read, which is characteristic of Cuban poets. They put us to shame. This is a poem dedicated to Helderlin. Germany, 1843. After battling, that abject individual died peacefully, face resting on the wood of the window frame, watching the snow fall and pile up over the same ground traveled by the gods. Circles never coming to a close, us. We go along wiping out our lifetimes. On some occasions, external men. On others, internal men, never the man fine and exact. Thus, the precariousness of our gestures. Circles never coming to a close. Someone at a more propitious moment, perhaps, may resolve this arduous issue. After battling, that abject individual died peacefully, face resting on the wood of the window frame, watching the snow fall and pile up over the same ground traveled by the gods. He's very interested in popular culture and song, which has a lot of repetition, but also the place that he's writing about is notorious for its incredibly uniform apartment buildings. So I think his repetition has a lot of layers. This is the last one I'll read, and it's called Manuscripts. It's his vision of writing as a whole. And the book cover is actually his handwriting. This is how he writes. Other people put his writing into the computer. Manuscripts. Deciphering what's written on the wind, it's a difficult task. Behind the metallic fence or curtain, smoke. Those who didn't risk the leap, they devoted themselves to neighborly chatter about what was there and what was done behind the metallic fence or curtain. Those who risked the leap, they came back quieted, as if they had contracted some illness that impeded their speech. Behind the metallic fence or curtain, smoke, writing what's encrypted in the wind. It's a difficult task. So the next book that's out will be by Ángel Escobar. It's just going to the printer, but I want to briefly mention here, if any of you are fans like I am of John Keane, the amazing poet and translator, he has a piece up right now at the Poetry Foundation's website calling for more attention to African diasporic writers because so few are ever translated. They tend to be marginalized. And I just want to point out, Ángel Escobar is an Afro-Cuban writer. He is deceased, so he can't advocate for himself any longer, but the University of Alabama Press will be doing that to the best of our ability. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Judy Chalmer. Thank you all for a beautiful poetry day. An essay on age. It was a day to sing the praises of fire, to bow to its purpose, toes stretched apart, layers peeled, our bodies gathered from their warmest folds. It was a day of mists, of freezing and love. Now the night, when it returns, will be kinder. Now the moon will dominate the dogs, sending them wild into the burdock, and we will have them for hours on their backs. This is the bright snap of apple, catch in the throat. You realize how deeply you have loved. You blow hard on the flames, and each day is remembered mainly for the brush of lips, for the way we stand hip to hip in sheets of rain with cover enough. An essay on violence. A plant, rosemary, in the north of Wales, survives the winter, licking mineral and mist. Round the globe, women like us have tongues in each other, and baby, just half of what I mean. Just the rough beginning sets free a moan so strong it spurs the heart to clapping. Back and forth between morning news and night, we steer the streets of hope, on no afternoon knowing what we mean when we wish the world safe. But we think and we fear no one is there, and listen. The spruce last night at the pond shed rain held in silence for hours beyond the storm. Please, crush me. Cover over the night's great booming. Beneath the snow this winter, some green beauty will keep its shine, its slight breath imperceptible, and here, in our bed, where we come to pronounce something gentle. An essay on awe. We were talking about God, a simple mark at the edge of some clumsy language. There was a broom fallen by the stump. A white dustpan lay carelessly on top, the sun a thin bracelet at its rim. Like an arm to a breast, the curved pan had gathered in our grime, and there it rested. A few rhododendrons squatted around the campsite, blooming under the birch. The stump was next to the tent, which we had upended. It was drying underneath, tilted toward the lake on its spine. Our hands touched. This has happened again and again. Unstrapped and unbuckled, we turn, and there's a new version of kindness. Red berries hung low from a shoreline tree. The speckled toad stopped freely under our chairs. All day there were wings, fluttering, olive, flashing auburn or glossy black. There were stripes, there were crests. We were swept in, our papery bark, our elbows and leaves, whispering. Thanks.
I guess we're three here today, right now. I'm Tines Caja Dash Alma Perez.
And I'm back, Kristen.
Christine Dijkstra. And this is the robo-poem number 5. And apparently he didn't feel that well because he's not really behaving, so I'm going to read for him. Robopoemas. 1. Habitada de códigos. Code, coding, circuits. Algoritmo que infiere mi entidad sin ponderar situación-efecto. Mera respuesta a tu número y tecla. Diodos, sintaxis digital. El verbo que me informa y proyecta.
It's a very serious poem, but I have to admit I have a hard time reading with a straight face, knowing that it's voiced by this darling, serious little bug-like robot, which when the project is complete, it will walk up to you, beep, 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 and say this. 1. Inhabited by ciphers, code, código, circuits, algorithm infers my entity without weighing position or effect. Pure response to your number and keyboard. Diode, digital syntax, the word that uninforms and designs me.
2. Avanzo, retrocedo. Mi cuerpo es una mera formación de cifras, reacción y calibre, módulo matemático en universo análogo en que habito. Nos duplicas.
2. I go forward, I go backward. My body is only an array of numbers, reaction, and caliber. Mathematical module inside the analog cosmos I inhabit, duplicating us.
3. Pero dejo de serte para ser y alcanzar el punto de partida, la llave operable del control digital.
3. But I leave off being you to be and get to the starting point, the key to OS control.
4. Te llego y soy, your flesh, mi carencia, tu carne, my shift, a que aspiro.
4. I arrive at you and exist. Tu carne, my deficiency, your flesh, mi tecla shift longing.
5. Avanzo y me desplomo y soy tu juguete circuito, el teclado de tu capricho y miedo a tu propia torpeza, vulnerable e impreciso en tu frágil universo que encapsulo.
This is robot number 5, so this poem is the one engraved in both languages on its body, if you want to come up and look at it later. 5. I step forward, buckle, and am your toy circuit, keyboard for impulse and fear of your own clumsiness, vulnerable and nebulous inside your fragile cosmos, which I compress.
6. Criatura Arduino, nada soy y lo soy todo. Resisto, me impongo, avanzo. Control, Shift, M.
6. Arduino creature, nothingness am I, and I am all. I withstand, prevail, go forward, Control, Shift, M.
7. A tu semejanza, mi imagen.
7. According to your likeness, my image.
Gracias. And just to mention that these robo-poems actually walk recognize each other, exchange voices, and creates hopefully that anxiety and this disconnect between humans and technology, which is what I was expecting, and confusing the concept of what means to be human, what means to be a creature, who creates whom. So thank you.
Hello, my name is Lizzie Fox. Thank you so much for this beautiful day. Everyone's wonderful to hear. This first poem is in the booklet. It's called The Gamble. Though it could close her airways to bite into the greenery, my new kitten beats playfully at the peace lily I'd hoped she would avoid. Her white paws are rapid fire. The elephant ears bend and drum as if shaking in the rain. Her eyes twitch. Her tail tip is a thin worm searching left and right. She opens her jaws, and a passing puff of dust distracts her. Now she is a wild thing crouched beneath a leaf. Relieved. My eyes twitch to the gray beyond the window where a white Bengal tiger stalks an elephant in the neighbor's driveway. If you've ever seen an elephant, you know how it hides in plain sight, that the eye can't register its enormity even while it flaps a gray ear like a flag in the wind. In their swimming pool, a shark fin splits the water. Everything goes gray, gray, gray. Coming up from the bottom of the deep end, a mermaid hits her highest note, wagering her voice away. The second poem, I'm just going to do two, also plays with this idea of voice and voicelessness. It's called Long Before Admitting I Was in Love. I wondered if the pizza in its box on top of the oven was mine. I smiled in the general direction of the owner. She didn't see me. I didn't make a fuss. She worked the ovens alone, jumped at the phone, counted change. I know how to sit quiet. It's a skill we acquire in school, some of us. It can make others nervous, even more so than a woman who sings loudly on the subway or while walking down the street. I waited for my pizza, writing softly, convinced then my pizza was the one on top of the oven and that it would grow slightly stale. The man next to me grew nervous. He wondered if I wrote about him and edged away from my elbow. With a slight cough, he brought his phone up to cover his face. I'd just gone to get my pizza, hot, to carry it home, to pay the bill. I wondered why such a small thing was an ordeal. Outside, it rained, and no one could hear a thing over the racket, water hitting the roof, hitting the road. I held myself in small form, legs crossed, biceps tight to my sides. I was layered and warm and so very strapped inside myself. I wonder if you'd walked in right then, if I would have even said a word. Thank you.
We're in the home stretch. Okay, I'm not displaced. I guess I'm a native Vermonter, though I've tried very hard not to be for a long time. I was determined to be a New Yorker. I fell in love with Pittsburgh. But my dad always said, you'll be back, so. But what's interesting is lately I find the landscape of Vermont creeping into my poems, mostly in the form of dead deer. I'm not sure what that's about, but whitetail. They're feeding while we sleep. Conifers, acorns, sweet clover, crepuscular. They must tell each other stories in whatever tongue they speak. Each fawn makes its own distinct bleat. Does the mouth make a sound for gun, arrow, berry, or flea? Arrested between the bramble and the suburban street, cars slide slowly as in a funeral processional. Our eyes meet. Who knows which way her children are or the lover she's running to? His velvet antlers unraveling. Flocked by night, I want to slip inside her, ears translucent in headlights, the white rings, halo, or ghostly bruise of eye. Front legs in the wood, hind on the concrete. It is so very hard to leave you. Mornings we made love, my daughter was late for school. I would let her drink hot chocolate and watch TV. It's true, I cared little for rules, for anything but you. At dusk, at dawn, I was in my pajamas, the buck hanging from the rafters of the garage. My mother took our picture, my hand on his flank. His coat faded red and still warm. Later, I would refuse to eat his neck, then his heart. In that photograph, I am frozen. I am proud of what my father has done. I have not been so proud. I have opened my wounds for all the curious to see. I have wandered naked among engines and headlights. I have let you make a feast of me. How our favorite muscle can rage within its sea. One might name the ribs like the arc of a boat, but they call it a cage, don't they? Gun, arrow, berry, flea. I know these woods well, this way to the creek, this way the massive pine split by lightning, north a field where you can find a brick cast by the old factory. I could point her to safety. I could whisper in those silken ears. I could taste her. Okay. I always tell my students they need to write outside their comfort zone, and I usually write about sex, so this is a poem about my dog. And like many dogs in Vermont, he came on one of those escaped death row caravans from South Carolina. So this is saved or fugitive. I have wanted to sharpen sticks, still sticky with pitch, and carve your name into my skin. Wanted to go missing. Take the wrong trail over the ridge, a blessing. Instead, I have taken off my clothes to swim, floated on my back, practiced breathing, praying for the leaves to turn gold, persimmon. Like clotted blood, the rare ruby or sour cherry. My sweet black shadow, go get it. Winter is coming, won't survive outside till spring. It's still wet like a seal, something half drowning, half alive on land. Carry it back to me, carrion calling, in a mouth of incisors and spotted tongue. He was ours for 2 years, but since you left, I run alone with him around this reservoir every morning, mostly in silence, though sometimes I weep, or you'd be surprised to know, sing. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. This morning I awoke to a swath of gray slicing through my hair. If the leaves turn, time passes. I know I am still beautiful, abandoned, that saved a wretch like me. When he arrived on the bus from South Carolina, small and worn with mange, we could feel his ribs and hip bones. He looked like something left for dead, which of course he was, smelling like an untended wound and barking relentlessly, furious with desire to be owned. He needed to run after the long trip in a urine-soaked crate, the day sleeping on concrete in the shelter. We brought him here to this reservoir, and he hid between your legs as he watched a pack of well-loved dogs run. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe this far. Dig up my heart, sweet fugitive. I once was blind, but now. Take me into your mouth, still wet and ticking like a bomb, like the tight pink fist of a peony wanting to explode. Thanks.
I'm Gary Margolis. Thank you for your writing and your incredible listening. Mall walking the dirt road. Good morning, shopkeepers, unlocking your plate glass doors, sweeping the overnight leaves. Hello, security, moving vagrant words along. Cheers to the custodians of stones, stone by stone. The delivery men unloading their stores, their pallets of birds. Congrats to the American Redstart, calling again. Red Wings, amazing diamond in the rough. A phrase the field uses to describe itself. Dew on a haystack, a jewel in the window. This morning you can stop on the side of the road to window shop, to catch your breath, to see where the deer sleep in their emerald beds, to find feathers for your headdress, to begin walking in circles again. I'm not going to ask each of us to reveal a habit that they haven't told, that's only yours, that you haven't told anybody else about. I hope you have one. The speaker in this poem does. My habit. I like to save the Sunday papers and read them at the end of the year. Maybe you do too. Although neither of us have said so each week, picking up our country's times, as if we were going to sit down at home, section by section, for the better half of an afternoon. I wouldn't mind if one of us said more than we do at the checkout counter, climbing into our cars in the parking lot. Something as strange as hello, as to why we have stacks of paper in our back seats, not saving them for mulch. Although that's not a bad idea, the volunteers at our co-op more than suggest. I'd tell them, on December 31st, I like to read Who's Still Married, what our world leaders month after month are leading us to. If the war was won or lost or changed its name, whose obituary was written 6 months ago. I like to guess what's been invented, whose reputation has been enhanced. If anyone's reading that terrific book, reviewed in March to get us through this winter's breath. And the cartoons that are so funny, they last. The one, I don't know if you saw it, of a rabbit sitting on Freud's couch, telling him a year's worth of bunny dreams. I hope you find amusing enough so we don't have to say we save things to recycle, to help our reputations at the co-op's checkout counter. And not just so, if we sit down to talk, to offer our names, either of us would have to explain why we love to read the sports scores late, who won their division, whose blouse was all the rage, what couch is still in fashion. Pancakes and kebabs. Our town invites in 3,000 refugees. We used to count ourselves in, our town of 953. We'll have to rent extra seats for them to raise their hands at town meeting, roll out blankets to kneel and pray on. Some of us are more fearful than afraid of pocket bread, lilac-colored headscarves, smoked lamb's tongue. Some of us speak 2 languages in our sleep, field and sea. Where they're from, they rarely vote by closing their eyes, laying their heads down on a school desk, raising their hands. Or, as we do, sometimes here, when we're concerned what our next-door neighbor will think, we write an X for yes on a piece of paper, Y for no, or leave it blank as an unplanted field. When we're asked to vote on whom and how many new citizens we can take in, remembering an empty manger, a boat teeming with fish, that first nurse who welcomed each of us into this swaddling world. Before we knew how to pray, we'd be wanted here, sitting or kneeling or not at all, a skull cap under a baseball hat, a blessed silk scarf to give away, or wear on a cold day in March, the parking lot overflowing at our polling place, the folding tables covered with pancakes and kebabs. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Anna Blackmer. Rhubarb. While on stage, repeat it under your breath to create the illusion of hubbub. While in the garden, pull the stalks smartly away from the base to keep them fresher longer. Whilst in Great Britain, sample the fool, the trifle, the crumble, the mess. While you're trying to decide what to do with it, admire the curve and color, remove the poisonous leaves, string the strings with a peeler or your fingernail. While on third base, pick a fight with the shortstop who's dressed in green and red and who's come raging over the steps to the west from the east like a barbarian. Knotweeds, buckwheats, sorrel, rhubarb, sour enough to scour pans or to kiss a strawberry to death in Pandowdy. I'm going to read one poem that's from a book based on the I Ching. And so each poem is titled with the title for one of the hexagrams. And they kind of double back. Preponderance of the great. If the big tree falls, it should land smack on the ridgepole of the house. Was that where we all slept once, as the foundations silted further south and the walls bowed out? But the big machines move forward. One can never keep up with the newspapers or even the furniture ads. I was flowering underwater like a poplar, growing and rotting at the same time. I was flowering underwater like a poplar, growing and rotting at the same time, along with the newspapers and furniture ads. But the big machines moved forward. One can never keep up. As the foundation silted further south and the walls of the house bowed out. Was that where we all slept once? If the big tree falls, it should land smack on the ridgepole. This is actually another one of those hexagrams, and it's about Cuba, sort of, or about a Cuba in the imagination. Fellowship with men. I was looking for something when I went to the island with a violent past. I saw fish in water, the color of heaven, and cane fires that distorted the fields at night. I didn't need to stand on top of the wall that had absorbed the blood crowds demanded just after the revolution. There was a gate, and I walked through it to join the others. There was a gate, and I walked through it to join the others the crowds demanded just after the revolution. I didn't need to stand on top of the wall that had absorbed their blood. Cane fires distorted the field as the night passed, and I saw fish in the water, a violence of heavenly color, something like what I was looking for when I came to the island. And this last poem, I went to a school in elementary school in Central California, and there were 8 of us in the 8th grade. And this is a little bit about that school. It's called Blood Sisters. Hanging upside down in the heat from the monkey bars, the plaid cotton dress mushrooming around my ears, talking to Patty Morrison, did I or did I not inhabit a completely different body? The next year, I learned to spin around the high bar with one leg hooked over and flip off backward to land on my feet. I fell plenty, had the wind knocked out of me, a new sensation that made me recognize death's smile. Teachers watched over us, blew whistles, but stood in the same spot every day, away from us, to avoid overhearing the violence of our conversations. Patty and I sneaked into the old basement, and it was so dark I fell into a hole we couldn't see, hidden by corrugated tin. My dress was ripped, and I was covered with dirt and spider webs. She pulled me out before the bell rang, and we ran to the far corner of the schoolyard, where the big eucalyptus trees grew, with a rope hanging down we couldn't yet climb up. Later on, I hated her, after she slammed some kind of thorn into my palm and made me rub my blood with hers, after her older sister made fun of me, after her teeth began to stick out. Thank you.
I see I have negative 12 minutes to read, so thank you very much. This first one is called Chicken. At the Harvest Festival, when we were celebrating with pumpkin tarts and cider, an older farmer asked what I was into, and maybe my answer was muffled a bit from the cider's tang, because he started talking passionately, not about his favorite poet or the use of weather in haiku, but about his chickens. White leghorns, silky bantams, Rhode Island Reds, buff Orpingtons. How in corporate agriculture the birds are bred so big that their legs cripple beneath them, and isn't that a shame? I tried to break in to tell him he'd misheard, but he shook his head and held up his finger. That wasn't the case with his birds. When his hens are laying, he puts oyster shells in their grit to give them extra calcium for their own shells. His birds are free range, not debeaked and stuffed 24 to a pen. Freedom makes all the difference in the world. You can taste their happiness, he said, even see it. Their yolks a rich, almost tangerine color, not pale like those you get from the grocery. And he was starting to get out of breath and short of breath from excitement. And by this time, to tell the truth, I was just hoping he didn't ask about my birds, because I don't know if I could have broken it to him. Poetry, I said, not poultry. So, one last poem for the day. The Iliad. That's an Ed Hurst joke, that's not mine. This is called Cold Was the Ground. It's about the Blind Willie Johnson blues song that is somewhere up in space on one of those gold discs on spacecraft Voyager. So, Cold Was the Ground. A moan dragged across gravel, a guitar's metallic complaint and shimmy. These sounds rattle the zodiac. They wail to the mute eruption and flare of a collapsing star. Dark was the night, cold was the ground, by blind Willie Johnson. 3 minutes and 15 seconds of bruised spiritual is touring the cosmos alongside the Brandenburg Concerto and Johnny Be Good on the spacecraft Voyager. The music flanked by a slew of natural sounds: surf and thunder, crickets, a kiss, a heartbeat, an oral primer to planet Earth. The world is phonic. What is matter? Blueberry, backhoe, the back of your hand, but the shard of that primeval sound when the universe detonated from the ghost of a pebble. On this journey, any one man's history is dwarfed by boundless gulf and pulsar. Voyager, long past Pluto, is 100,000 years from the next system. But here you are on Earth. And so it matters that when Johnson was 7, his stepmother, aiming for his father, cast lie into his face, the price for his father's infidelity. Blinded, he was resigned to a street corner, the dull rattle of tips pooling in a cup, a woman passing to another running catalog of bouquets, husk of sweat at first, then salt, then almonds, her body's continuous assertions grown hyperbolic. He could smell moods, their delicate swerves, evident as each nuance of skins pit and swell. He could smell the fur before it brushed his arm, before the woman backed away in a clatter of heels. And years later, he could smell the stench of soaked char in the ruined pit of his house. Turned away from the hospital after the fire that gutted his roof, he returned to a rain-soaked bed of newspaper and soot, and pneumonia killed him in the ashes, beneath a ceiling not of wood or plaster, but of stars. What are blues with no human to hear? What is a kiss or a heartbeat to that grand sweep of interplanetary ash, but molecules bumping molecules? Stranger, unimaginable intergalactic pilgrim who's never even heard of a tongue, if you've found this note curled in our $1 million can, hear the absurdity of our glory and our pain. Transmute it into we know not what. Space dust, star kindling, restore us back to sound. Thank you.
Well, after an afternoon of wonderful poetry, we'd like to thank you all for coming out, to the poets for sharing your poems, and to those of you who came to listen to the poems. Also, thanks to the library for hosting this event, RETN for filming this for public access TV, and to Phoenix Books for their support.